In today's video, we are going to discuss kids' birthday parties. Hey guys, my name is Erin Courtney. Over the years, I've been planning my kids' birthday parties, and they've ranged from anywhere to huge gatherings that I spent a year prepping and planning for, and then there's been other parties where I kind of threw everything together at the last minute. My son recently turned 7, and when I asked him, "Hey bud, what kind of cake do you want?" he said he wanted a sea turtle cake. Well, I've never made a sea turtle cake, and I don't really decorate cakes all that much anymore, so I decided to watch some YouTube videos on how to make a sea turtle cake. In this video, we are going to be discussing some tips and tricks for planning your kids' birthday parties. But where did my niece lose her phone? And how can adults have fun at a kid's party too? Stay tuned to find out. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button because there's gonna be a lot more videos coming. So let's get started. I'm gonna show you all about this year's birthday party. First things first, let's get started on our sea turtle cake. Bear with me here because this was literally the first time I had ever made a turtle out of fondant, and then watched a YouTube video, imagine that, to get some ideas on how to get this started. While the camera was rolling, this was my first time experimenting with it, and it was a little bit of trial and error. The consistency of fondant is very similar to Play-Doh, but honestly, I actually prefer the consistency a little better of fondant than Play-Doh. Technically, you can eat fondant, but I prefer not to, and I like to use it as decorations. This fondant that I'm working with was pulled directly out of the package because fresh fondant is much easier to work with. So any fondant that you don't use, make sure you wrap it up really well. I usually wrap mine in plastic wrap and then put it inside of a sealed bag to help keep it as fresh as possible, making it much easier to work with. As you can see, I'm using a little bit of water and brushing that on, and that just helps the fondant to attach to each other. Remember how I said fondant is edible? This is no longer edible because I'm using a Sharpie to color little pupils on our turtle's eyes. I was having to improvise since I didn't have any black fondant or food coloring to use. In all honesty, I made this turtle about 2 days in advance before putting it on the cake, but I definitely should have made it about 2 weeks ahead because whenever I was working with moving the turtle from its spot to the cake, it wasn't very cooperative. And that's a trick I learned from my sister-in-law because anytime she makes decorations that are made out of fondant, she makes them way ahead of time so that they dry out and they're a lot easier to work with. I mean, we're not going to be eating this big old fella anyway. There are 2 other tips that really help whenever it comes to playing with fondant. First of all, you don't want your fondant to be cold. It's really hard to work with if you have cold fondant. Room temperature or very slightly warm works well. And also, I keep vegetable shortening close by because it might look shiny right here. It's because of the vegetable shortening. If you're trying to shape cold fondant with dry hands, it's not going to be a fun experience, and you might end up throwing the fondant across the room. Not that I've ever experienced that before, of course. And if you're using one of these little tools to put indentions, make sure you do that when the fondant is fresh and you've just been working on it. As you can see, this poor little turtle has a lopsided design. Don't judge me. This was my first time, but I did have fun doing it. And although our cute little turtle is not super professional looking, my little guy loved it. I only wish I could have gotten the look on his face whenever I showed him this turtle when it was all done. The video that I watched of how to make this turtle, she did some really cool little accents with brown glitter, food coloring, and I didn't have all of that, so we were just sticking with cute, especially since it was a 7-year-old's birthday, and I don't think he's going to be too worried about his turtle not having accents. I typically use this little measured sill pad underneath because that way you know how big or small you need for decorations for your cake. Since the cake that we are using is a 10-inch cake, I wanted to make sure that the turtle wasn't too big but was big enough that it would cover most of the top. And parchment paper is extremely helpful when you're making decorations like this because you can transport to different surfaces, so you can take this off of your measured sill pad. If you're making sure that the fondant dries out a little bit before you put it on your cake, just set it aside at room temperature uncovered on a flat surface. And when I make my kids' cakes, I like to do a combination of fondant and buttercream and chocolates wherever I can. I'm not a huge fan of fondant covered cakes because fondant just doesn't really taste as good as buttercream to me, which is why I like using a combination of all things. It's time to move on to our chocolate decorations. We are making cute little seashells. I have put white chocolate in the sand dollar molds. For a color variation for some of our other chocolate seashells, I've taken the white chocolate, melted a little bit of dark chocolate, and kind of swirled it in there to give it that look. I'm also throwing in some pink chocolate for the conch shells just to give it a little bit of difference in color. As you can see, I'm using a toothpick to smooth the chocolate out into the molds. Pop those in the freezer for about 10 minutes. When you take the chocolates out of the freezer, we're just going to give them a little tap on the back. A little tap, tap, taparoo. And one of the best parts is to look at a cake and tell a kid, "You can eat that, that's chocolate." It's time to put that cake together. The cake I made is a yellow cake with mini chocolate chips. I ended up doing a double batch. This is a pretty big cake. It's 3 10-inch round layers, and I'm doing chocolate icing in between those 3 layers. This is just store-bought icing that I grabbed. This was the creamy chocolate. I do take shortcuts when necessary, and this was a necessary shortcut. I did make a mistake while I was putting this together. This chocolate icing that I'm putting in between the layers is really, really smooth and creamy, and it's not very stable. And anytime you travel with a cake, stability is quite important, and you will see why this cake needed more stability than what I gave it. 2 things I do differently when I typically decorate a layered cake like this for events, especially if I'm going to take it somewhere. First of all, I make it the day ahead instead of the day of. I put this cake together the day of the party. In fact, this was about an hour before we left. So this icing stayed pretty fresh and moist and smooth and delicious, but that's not all that great whenever you're traveling with the cake. The second thing I could have done was stuck some dowel rods in there, which I did not do. And guess what happened on the car ride over? My poor little cake layers started to slide. In all honesty, I should have known better, but I haven't decorated cakes in a while, and I'm human, and my brain sometimes forgets. It's okay. It all worked out. So for the next time I have to travel somewhere with a cake, I will make sure I either put dowel rods in it or make it the day before, or any or all of the above. For the outside of the cake, I just made a standard Decorator icing. The standard Decorator icing recipe that I use is 2 pounds of powdered sugar, 2 cups of vegetable shortening, half cup of water, and 1 teaspoon of whatever extract that you're going to use. In this recipe today, I use almond extract because I love almond extract, and I just tinted it a blue for that ocean look. You could go with a deep blue or a light blue, but sometimes if you use too much food coloring, you can taste it in the icing, and I was trying to avoid that if at all possible. And I was just trying to get the sides to be pretty smooth, but on top I wanted to give it a little bit of texture, like waves, I guess. And then I set aside the icing that I didn't color blue so that I could do green and yellow and purple. You can get creative and do any type of coral that you want. I was keeping it simple because I was also in a rush to get this cake done before the party. Don't procrastinate like I did. And as I decorated this cake, it kind of made me giggle on the yellow, because if you look at how I do the yellow, it looks like it's yellow intestines that are kind of swirling around. That's terrible. That's terrible. Don't think of it like that. And just remember, whenever it comes to decorating a cake, do your best. I can tell you from experience, kids don't know the difference between professional and homemade just yet. And I can tell you that they really love it when mommy makes their cake, if she can. Please don't ever feel bad about outsourcing your cake, because I've done it too when times called for it. For our makeshift sand, I use a combination of graham cracker crumbs and brown sugar. I've heard people talk about you can use either or, but I like to use the combination of both because Brown sugar itself is super, super sweet, and graham crackers, they just crumble all over the place. So the two mixed together, I think, gives it a better consistency and look. And as you can see, since some of that sand piled up a little bit taller than I thought it was going to, I ended up going back around because my OCD kicked in and I started adding more icing. And here you can go ahead and start placing those little chocolate seashells. That's my favorite part of the cake, is the chocolate seashells. Turtle? What turtle? I didn't see the turtle. I just want those chocolate seashells I can stuff in my mouth. Once they're all on there, you can put more sand as needed. It's time for Mr. Turtle to go on top of the cake. And as you see, his head fell off during the process. That's okay, I just stuck it right back on there and nobody noticed. Well, unless they watch this video and then they'll see that our poor turtle was decapitated. Here is our finished product with our sea turtle fondant and our buttercream icing and chocolate seashells. It's time to call the birthday boy downstairs to take a look at his cake.
Ow.
Why'd you fall on the floor?
And then like that.
Come here, come look at it.
Like, are those real seashells?
Those are chocolate seashells.
They look like they were real.
Yeah? Here, come around the front. Go around the front. No, go around the front of the cake.
Huh?
You like it?
Yeah. You made that?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Wait, how?
Very carefully. Ready for your party?
Yeah.
You gonna party hard?
Yeah.
Okay. My least favorite part of all kitchen experiments is hands down the cleanup. As you can see, we have quite a collection of a lot of the stuff that I was putting together, and this doesn't even show all of it. That's alright, I'll clean this up later. It's time to get ready to party. I made some cupcakes for his actual birthday about a week before the party that he took to school, and the leftovers I ended up sticking in the freezer and pulled them out to take to the party. We also decided to book a venue for this year's party. It's a lot easier to just pack everything up and run to the venue, and you have a time limit. Usually whenever we have parties at our house, people are still here for 3 or 4 hours, which is fine with me, but my introverted husband, not so much. The venue that we booked is very child friendly because it is an after-school child program, which lets you rent out space for birthday parties on the weekend. Perfect! So they get to run around like crazy little banshees and get all that energy out, especially since you're gonna be feeding them cake. We did decide to pay a little extra for the slingshot option because the kids get so excited to do the slingshot. They get to line up and take turns. Birthday boy was first in line and he was ready to go. Even though not all the kids jumped in line to do the slingshot, the ones who did had a fantastic time. Next up was Big Sister.
You like it or not? I can't tell. Oh, she loves it.
My brother is standing next to me saying, "Let me spring her."
No, let me spring her. You might hit the fence though. That wouldn't be
But then watching the kids do that, now he got the idea that he wants to build one of these in his backyard. And honestly, I would not be surprised that I'd be the first person over there to try it out. In fact, the only reason I'm not on this thing today is because there is a 115-pound weight limit. Boo!
Do that what you're doing with her.
I've got to build one of those in the house.
He said I gotta build one of those at the house.
Seriously, that would be cool.
Little piece of advice here: if you ever go to jump into a foam pit that is over 6 feet deep, don't have your phone hanging out of your pocket, because it will fall out, and that is exactly what happened to my poor niece. When they asked her what color her phone is, her phone was blue. Talk about looking for a needle in a haystack. The good news is they did eventually find her phone and the entire place erupted in applause. When it comes to food and parties, my best friend just asked me this. Hey Nicole, depending on when the party is, that determines what kind of food I'll be serving. If it's between the hours of 11 a.m. and 1 p.m., that's typically lunch. So I'm gonna serve some kind of lunch or really heavy hors d'oeuvres that fill you up as much as lunch do. If it's in the afternoon around 2 or 3, just cake and drinks and maybe one snack. And then again in the evening, if it's around dinner time, heavy foods or a meal. And since we were having the party at a venue, pizza's the way to go, baby. For the drinks, we just brought a cooler full of Capri Suns, water, and Gatorade. My husband calls me the soda Nazi because I refuse to serve soda. I'm sorry. No, I'm not. Soda's terrible. Here was the table set up for the food at the party. As you can see, those layers slid some, and I tried to doctor it up as much as I could, but no one seemed to notice, so that's okay. And I also forgot to bring an extra tablecloth for the food table. I'm killing this whole party thing, man, I tell ya. For his birthday party this year, I kept the decorations really simple. Call me lazy or call me smart. Since the birthday boy's favorite colors are blue and green, we went with blue and green, and it went along with the sea turtle cake as well. And as you can see, they were chowing down on their pizza.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Owen. Happy birthday to you. All right, bud. Blow out the candle.
This is the leftover cake. That's a lot of leftover cake. Any leftover cake that you have is good at room temperature for up to 5 days, or you can put it in the freezer for up to 6 months. And if you're wondering how adults can have fun at a kid's birthday party, it's by throwing stuff at each other. Here, I'm showing my love for my brother and my husband by throwing things at them and enjoying it way too much. We started out by shooting basketball, but then we got bored and my brother found a football. One of the things that I constantly try to tell people, especially other parents that are planning their kids' birthday parties, is to have a good time. They aren't really going to remember elaborate decorations or fancy things that you do for these parties. It's how much fun that they have. And if the parents can have fun at these parties too, then it's a win-win all the way around. And a lot of people ask me if I do party favors at my parties, and I used to starting out. But then the second that my kids started expecting to get party favors at other kids' parties, that's when I stopped doing it at ours. And the reason I did that is because I didn't want my kids to worry about what they got at other people's parties. I just wanted them to have fun and spend time with the birthday kids. But that is my goal when it comes to parties, is just keeping things fun and simple, because you don't want to stress yourself out too much and you just want to be able to have a good time. And if you're looking for party foods and tips and tricks, be sure to check out my cookbook, Party Time. This has over 100 easy recipes that are perfect for parties, along with planning tips and tricks and menu ideas. That wraps it up for today. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.